On a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean in Newport, Rhode Island, stands a mansion built entirely of marble. Marble House, 50 rooms, 500,000 cubic feet of marble, American, Italian, African, 36 servants, a gold ballroom dripping with gilt, dining room walls carved from single slabs of pink Numidian marble, a temple front portico modeled after the White House itself, cost $11 million in 1892, equivalent to $387 million today. It was a birthday present from a husband to his wife, the most expensive birthday gift in American history. 3 years later, that same wife would divorce him, citing years of infidelity, including an affair with her own best friend, the woman for whom she had named her daughter. That daughter, beautiful, obedient, 18 years old, would be locked in her bedroom at Marble House and told that if she didn't marry a British duke, her mother would murder the man she loved. The girl wept through her entire wedding ceremony, visible tears streaming down her face behind her veil as thousands watched. The duke told her on their honeymoon that he had only married her for money, $2.5 million in railroad stock, to be precise, plus a $100,000 annual allowance and the promise of more. This is the story of Marble House, of Alva Vanderbilt, the woman who built it as her temple to power, of Consuelo Vanderbilt, the daughter who was sold like chattel to save her mother's reputation, and of William K. Vanderbilt, the man who gave his wife a marble palace and then destroyed their marriage by sleeping with her closest friend. It's a story of forced marriage, scandalous divorce, and the transformation of a society matriarch into America's most radical suffragette. Welcome to Marble House, where every room tells a story of betrayal. Alva Erskine Smith was born in Mobile, Alabama in 1853 into a wealthy Southern family. She summered in Newport. She was educated in Paris. She made friends with the daughters of America's old money aristocracy, including a beauty named Consuelo Iznaga, who would become her best friend. Then, in 1871, everything collapsed. Alva's mother died. The family fortune evaporated. By age 17, Alva found herself motherless and nearly penniless in New York City. She had one advantage, her well-connected friends, and one massive disadvantage. She was, by all accounts, homely, square-chinned, plain, not beautiful in an era when a woman's beauty and wealth were her only currencies. But Alva was brilliant, witty, ambitious, and absolutely ruthless. In 1875, her childhood friend Consuelo Iznaga introduced her to William Kissam Vanderbilt, Willie, the rakish, charming grandson of railroad magnate Cornelius Vanderbilt. Willie was handsome, wealthy, and easily manipulated. Alva married him within months. She had 3 children, a daughter named Consuelo after her best friend, and 2 sons, Willie Jr. and Harold. And then Alva set out to do what no one thought possible: force New York's old money aristocracy to accept the Vanderbilt name. In 1883, she threw a costume ball at the Petit Chateau, their massive Fifth Avenue mansion. It was the social event of the decade. 1,000 guests in elaborate costumes. Alva herself came dressed as a Venetian princess. The key guest, Caroline Astor, the Mrs. Astor, the gatekeeper of New York society, who had spent years snubbing the Vanderbilts as vulgar nouveau riche. Mrs. Astor wanted desperately to attend, but Alva hadn't invited her. The message was clear. If Mrs. Astor wanted into Alva's ballroom, she would have to call on Alva first, a symbolic admission that the Vanderbilts were now equals. Mrs. Astor caved. She paid a formal call on Alva. The invitation arrived the next day. Alva had won. The Vanderbilts were now New York royalty, but Alva wasn't satisfied with Manhattan. She wanted Newport. In 1888, she commissioned architect Richard Morris Hunt, the first American to graduate from the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, to design a summer cottage in Newport that would surpass anything ever built in America. Willie's instructions to Hunt were simple: build the very best living accommodation that money could buy. The result was Marble House, inspired by the Petit Trianon at Versailles. 4 years of construction from 1888 to 1892. 20 workers working in shifts, 5 master carpenters hand-carving southern white oak woodwork, 500,000 cubic feet of marble, not $7 million worth as newspapers reported. That was an exaggeration, but still an astonishing $1.75 million spent on stone alone. The mansion was built in secrecy. Fences were erected around the construction site. And here's where the story gets strange. Alva insisted that none of the workers speak English. Chinese laborers were brought in specifically so they couldn't gossip about the mansion in Newport's bars and reveal Alva's plans before the house was complete. The house was presented to Alva on her 39th birthday in 1892. The deed was in her name. Marble House belonged entirely to her, a shocking arrangement for the time when married women rarely owned property outright. But Willie understood his wife. He knew what she wanted wasn't just a house, it was power. Marble House wasn't a home, it was a weapon. 50 rooms spread across 4 levels. The gold ballroom, officially called the Grand Salon, designed in the Louis XIV style, with green silk velvet upholstery and gilt panels depicting scenes from classical mythology. The Gothic room, displaying Alva's collection of medieval and Renaissance decorative objects. The library in the Rococo style. The dining room with walls carved from single slabs of pink Numidian marble, arranged in a technique called book matching, cutting one slab in half to create mirroring patterns. Alva's bedroom featured an 18th century ceiling painting of Athena. Willie's bedroom was significantly smaller and far plainer. Even in architecture, the power dynamic was clear. Marble House required a staff of 36 servants, butlers, maids, coachmen, footmen, a French chef who burned 30 tons of coal each summer in the kitchen. It was the most opulent summer cottage in Newport, more expensive than the Breakers, which Willie's older brother Cornelius was building nearby. Alva had achieved everything she'd set out to do. She had power, she had prestige, she had one of the finest houses in America. But underneath the marble facade, her marriage was crumbling. Willie Vanderbilt was bored. He was the grandson of one of America's richest men, but he had done nothing to earn his fortune. He raced yachts, he gambled, he attended his club, he threw money at expensive hobbies. And as Alva focused more and more on her social campaigns, the balls, the parties, the endless maneuvering, Willie's eye began to wander. There were mistresses, many of them. One in particular was a French woman. Willie bought her an apartment in Paris and gave her an annual allowance of $200,000. Alva knew. High society wives always knew, and they tolerated it because divorce was social suicide. But then came the ultimate betrayal. Willie began an affair with Consuelo Iznaga, Alva's childhood best friend, the woman who had introduced them, the woman for whom Alva had named her own daughter. That was the final straw. In March 1895, just 3 years after Marble House was completed, Alva Vanderbilt shocked New York society by filing for divorce. Divorce was virtually unheard of among the elite. Wives suffered through indignities, but they stayed married. Men held the power, the wealth, the legal standing. But Alva was different. She already owned Marble House outright. She had her own base of power, and she was done. The grounds for divorce, adultery, the settlement, over $10 million plus several estates. The scandal, enormous. High society turned on her immediately. Dinner party invitations dried up. Former friends refused to acknowledge her on the street. Alva Vanderbilt, the woman who had forced Mrs. Astor to bow, was now a social pariah. But Alva had a plan. If she could make her daughter a duchess, married to British nobility, society would have to accept her again. Everyone wanted to socialize with the mother of a duchess. There was just one problem. Consuelo, now 18 years old, was secretly engaged to someone else. Winthrop Rutherford, Winty, a handsome American socialite from one of New York's oldest families, part of the 400, Mrs. Astor's list of the city's true elite. 15 years older than Consuelo, it would have been a perfect match. Old money, American, a man Consuelo actually loved, but Alva wouldn't allow it. She had already chosen Consuelo's husband, Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough, cousin to Winston Churchill, owner of Blenheim Palace. The Duke was drowning in debt. Blenheim Blenheim Palace was falling apart. He desperately needed money. Alva desperately needed respectability. It was the perfect transaction, a cash-for-title exchange, one of the first dollar princess marriages of the Gilded Age. There was just one obstacle. Consuelo refused. She told her mother she loved Winty Rutherford. She wanted to marry him. Alva flew into a rage. She called Rutherford a scoundrel, a fortune hunter, a philanderer. She claimed his family was prone to madness. Consuelo stood firm, so Alva escalated. She locked Consuelo in her bedroom at Marble House. She posted guards to ensure no letters could be sent or received. She told her daughter that if Consuelo ran away with Winthrop Rutherford, Alva would have him murdered. She would shoot him herself. Consuelo, terrified but still defiant, refused to consent. And then Alva played her final card. She claimed to be desperately, fatally ill. She took to her bed. She appeared to be dying. She told Consuelo that her stubbornness was killing her own mother, trapped, isolated, watching her mother apparently waste away from grief and rage. Consuelo finally broke. She agreed to marry the Duke. Alva made an astonishing, miraculous recovery. The engagement was announced in August 1895. The Duke came to Newport as Alva's guest, and the publicity machine roared to life. Lavish balls, newspaper coverage, society buzzing with excitement. Consuelo went everywhere with the Duke, always accompanied by Alva. The girl couldn't keep the anguish out of her eyes. When the Duke formally proposed to her at Marble House, he was dutiful, mechanical, like a cadet, Consuelo later wrote. When she told her younger brothers about the engagement, she burst into tears. But the wedding was set November 6, 1895, St. Thomas Episcopal Church in New York City. On November 6, 1895, thousands of people gathered outside St. Thomas Church in Manhattan. Hundreds of police officers struggled to control the crowds, mostly women, desperate for a glimpse of the bride. Inside the church, the city's elite filled the pews. The Jays, the Astors, the Belmonts, everyone who mattered in New York society. Alva had dressed Consuelo in a wedding gown she had chosen herself before the engagement was even official. The bridesmaids were hand-picked by Alva. Consuelo walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Willie K. Vanderbilt, who Alva allowed to attend only for appearances, would leave immediately after the ceremony. As Consuelo entered the church, the crowd turned to face her, and they saw immediately that she had been crying. Her face was red, her eyes were swollen. Behind her veil, tears streamed down her cheeks. She wept through the entire ceremony. It was obvious to everyone that this was not a happy bride, but the wedding proceeded anyway. Consuelo Vanderbilt married Charles Spencer Churchill, 9th Duke of Marlborough, in front of hundreds of witnesses. The price tag, $2.5 million in railroad stock for the Duke, plus a $100,000 annual allowance for Consuelo during her father's lifetime, with a covenant that Willie's estate would transfer an additional $2.5 million to Consuelo's trustees upon his death. In total, Willie K. Vanderbilt would eventually settle or transfer over $17 million for the benefit of Consuelo, the Duke, and their children. The Duke had sold himself for cash. Consuelo had been sold like cattle. The honeymoon was worse. As they traveled to Europe, Consuelo watched her new husband preen over congratulatory letters from British nobility, including Queen Victoria herself. She realized with sinking horror that she had married a shallow, vain man, and that she was now a duchess, subject to all the snobbery and rigid protocol of the British aristocracy, which made New York society look egalitarian by comparison. But the worst revelation came when the Duke made a stunning confession. He told Consuelo on their honeymoon that he had only married her for money, to save Blenheim Palace, that he was in love with another woman back in England, and that he despised anything that was not British. Consuelo was 18 years old, trapped in a foreign country, married to a man who openly hated her. The marriage was doomed from the start. Consuelo did her duty. She gave birth to 2 sons, John, the heir, in 1897, and Ivor in 1898. The British aristocracy adored her. The poor tenants on the Blenheim estate loved her for her kindness and charity work. She became friends with the royal family family, but privately the marriage was in name only. Within a few years, Consuelo reconnected with Winthrop Rutherford and spent 2 weeks with him in Paris. The Duke, for his part, fell in love with Gladys Deacon, an eccentric American beauty of little money but dazzling intellect. In 1906, just 11 years after the wedding, the Marlboroughs officially separated. They didn't divorce until 1921, 15 years of separation. And then, in 1926, the marriage was annulled at the Duke's request so he could convert to Roman Catholicism. The annulment required testimony about the coercion that had forced the marriage in the first place. And to everyone's surprise, Alva Belmont, as she was now known, having remarried, testified in support of the annulment. She confessed under oath, "I forced my daughter to marry the Duke. I have always had absolute power over my daughter." It was the admission of a tyrant, the confession of a mother who had treated her daughter as a chess piece. But by then, Alva and Consuelo had reconciled. The relationship between mother and daughter impossibly had healed, and Consuelo had found happiness at last. On July 4th, 1921, mere weeks after her divorce was finalized, Consuelo married Lieutenant Colonel Jacques Balsan, a dashing French aviator and balloonist who had worked with the Wright brothers. It was, in Consuelo's own words, a marriage of love. Balsan had been in love with her since her debutante days. He had seen her just before her 18th birthday and fallen instantly. He had waited over 2 decades for her. They lived happily at their chateau near Fontainebleau, where Winston Churchill and his wife Clementine were frequent guests. Alva, aging and alone, eventually bought a neighboring chateau to be near her daughter, the tyrant and her victim, finally at peace. But what happened to Alva in those years between her scandalous divorce and her reconciliation with Consuelo? She became a radical. 9 months after divorcing Willie, Alva married Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont, a Newport neighbor and one of Willie's oldest friends. Oliver was a banker and yachtsman, 5 years younger than Alva. He had deserted his first wife on their honeymoon to travel through Spain with a French dancer. He was, in other words, not a man interested in stability. Alva moved into Oliver's mansion, Belcourt Castle, just down Bellevue Avenue from Marble House. But in August 1895, the same month the Duke of Marlborough came to Newport, Alva made a bold decision. She used Marble House, which she still owned, to throw Consuelo's debutante ball. The event was legendary. 300 live hummingbirds were released to hover around an indoor fountain in the Gold Ballroom. 400 guests attended. The most eligible fortune hunters in America and Europe were there that night, including the Duke himself. It was theater, spectacle, and it worked. Society couldn't resist. The mother of a future duchess was too valuable to shun. Alva had saved her reputation, but Oliver Belmont died in 1908, just 12 years into their marriage, and Alva, now a wealthy widow who had buried 2 husbands, underwent a transformation. She became a suffragette, not a genteel advocate for women's rights, a radical activist. In 1909, she founded the Political Equality Association to campaign for suffrage-supporting politicians in New York State. In 1913, she built the Chinese Tea House on the grounds of Marble House overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. It wasn't just an exotic ornament, it was a headquarters for suffrage rallies. Alva held political meetings there. She sold Votes for Women memorabilia from its brightly lacquered walls. In 1914, she convened a Conference of Great Women at Marble House. Consuelo, still married to the Duke but now promoting suffrage and prison reform in England, addressed the gathering. Alva served on the executive committee of the Congressional Union for Woman Suffrage from 1914 to 1916. In 1916, she co-founded the National Woman's Party with Alice Paul. In January 1917, Alva organized the first protest ever to take place in front of the White House, picketing for women's suffrage. She was arrested, jailed. She didn't care. The woman who had once obsessed over social standing now marched in the streets demanding equal rights. What changed? Her divorce had taught her something. She had spent 20 years in a marriage where the man held all the power. The wealth, the legal authority. She had discovered how precarious women's positions truly were, how little protection they had, how easily they could be discarded. She had forced her own daughter into that same trap, a powerless marriage to a man who controlled everything. And then she had watched Consuelo endure 26 years of misery before finally winning her freedom. Alva couldn't undo what she had done to Consuelo, but she could try to change the system that had made it possible. In the 1920s, Alva retired to France. She had a townhouse in Paris, a villa on the Riviera, and in 1926, she purchased the 15th century Chateau d'Hauteville and restored it as her primary residence. She lived there with Consuelo nearby. The two women finally reconciled. In the spring of 1932, Alva suffered a stroke that left her partially paralyzed. She died in Paris on January 26, 1933, of bronchial and heart ailments. Her funeral at St. Thomas Episcopal Church in New York City, the same church where Consuelo had wept through her wedding, featured all-female pallbearers and a large contingent of suffragists. She was buried with Oliver Belmont in the Belmont Mausoleum at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, and Marble House, Alva sold it in 1932, 1 year before her death. During the depths of the Great Depression, the buyer, Frederick H. Prince, a Boston stockbroker, the sale price, $1 for the mansion, $99,999 for its contents, total $100,000 for a house that had cost $11 million to build 40 years earlier. It was one of the most dramatic depreciations in real estate history, but by 1932, the Gilded Age was long over. Marble palaces were white elephants, tax burdens, antiquated relics of a vanished world. The Prince family owned Marble House for over 30 years, occupying it only during Newport's summer season and taking special care to preserve its interiors. In 1957, they hosted the legendary Tiffany Ball at Marble House to benefit the Preservation Society of Newport County. 1,200 guests attended, including Senator John F. Kennedy. In 1963, the Preservation Society of Newport County purchased Marble House from the Prince estate with funds provided by Harold Sterling Vanderbilt, Consuelo's younger brother, now nearly 80 years old. Today, Marble House is a museum open to the public, one of Newport's most popular tourist attractions. You can walk through the gold ballroom where Alva threw her legendary parties. You can see the Gothic room where she displayed her medieval treasures. You can stand in Consuelo's bedroom and imagine the girl locked inside, crying, pleading with her mother to let her marry the man she loved. You can visit the Chinese tea house where Alva sold suffrage memorabilia and plotted the downfall of the patriarchy. What do we make of Alva Vanderbilt Belmont? She was a monster. She locked her daughter in a room and threatened to commit murder. She forced an 18-year-old girl into a loveless marriage with a man who openly despised her, but she was also a revolutionary. She divorced when divorce was social suicide. She fought for women's suffrage when it was considered radical and dangerous. She organized protests. She was arrested. She used her wealth and power to fight for change. She was both villain and hero, tyrant and liberator, and Marble House reflects that duality perfectly. It's a monument to excess, to the Gilded Age's grotesque inequality, to the idea that one family could spend $11 million on a summer cottage while workers toiled for pennies. But it's also a symbol of female autonomy. Alva owned Marble House outright, shocking for 1892. She used it as a base of power when society tried to destroy her. She transformed it into headquarters for the suffrage movement. The same mansion where a daughter was imprisoned became a fortress where women planned their liberation. That's the paradox of the Gilded Age. The same families who built marble palaces and sold their daughters for titles also produced the women who would dismantle that system. Alva Vanderbilt was a product of her time. She understood that in the 1890s, a woman's only path to power was through marriage and social connections. So she ruthlessly exploited those systems. But when those systems failed her, when her husband's infidelity and her scandalous divorce revealed how precarious her position truly was, she turned against them. She became, in her own words, a born rebel. And Consuelo, she survived. She endured 26 years in a gilded cage, produced 2 sons, charmed British royalty, and supported countless charitable causes. And then she escaped. She divorced. She remarried for love. She spent 40 years with Jacques Balsan in France. Finally happy, she wrote a memoir, The Glitter and the Gold, that exposed the cruelty of arranged marriages and the hypocrisy of Gilded Age society. She died in 1964 at age 87, buried at St. Martin's Church in Blaydon, England, not far from Blenheim Palace, the house she had been sold to save. Her gravestone is simple, dignified, free. Walk through Marble House today, and you're walking through the story of 2 women trapped by the expectations of their era. One who chose to imprison her daughter to save her own reputation. One who chose to endure imprisonment rather than destroy her mother. Both eventually chose freedom. Marble House stands as a monument to that choice, to the cost of power, to the price of freedom. 500,000 cubic feet of marble, 36 servants, a gold ballroom, a Chinese tea house, and behind it all, a birthday present that became a prison. A mother who became a tyrant, a daughter who became a duchess, and eventually